Well, hello everybody, and thank you so much for tuning into this video. I do hope all of you have enjoyed the process so far. I know I've been having a lot of fun doing this from home. It's not exactly how I wanted to do this. It's not. I know it's not how my director wanted to do it. Um, but it has been a lot of fun. It's been a very rewarding experience, and I do hope it's even been rewarding for my director. I know that she wanted to do this at her school, but she was unable to. So I really hope this does. This is a rewarding experience for her too. Um, so we are getting very close to wrapping up this first show that I've been working on, and I'm very excited to be able to kind of wrap this up, because things would be getting a lot more, uh, honestly, a lot more interesting if I were actually to be working on this show in an actual space. Obviously, the whole process from first production meeting up until the very until strike is of course very interesting. I love the whole process, but there's nothing better in my mind than being able to take what I've been doing on paper for so long and being able to actually turn it into something on stage. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have that possibility right now. I do have an option to hopefully uh, make a few looks with my 3D rendering program. Hopefully, my computer will be able to handle those processes, so I'll be able to actually do that and have some 3D looks to be able to show you guys. Um, I have a couple different uh, systems that I can use, and I'm just hoping I'll be able to actually show some looks uh, that would be made on stage. So this video is going to be talking about the implementation process. Implementation is one of the last steps in the design process. This is where we take our design and we implement it. No, this is installing the lights, hanging the lights, focusing, going through the queuing process, going through tech and all that. Tech is going to be the next video. In this video, I'm just going to talk to you about what would happen in the space before tech. So at this point in the game, if we were actually in a theater, actually doing the show, we would have had our electrics crew hang the plot, which I made. And the head electrician, the master electrician, would have taken the plot. He would have hung it. He or she, excuse me, they would have hung the plot, cabled it, making sure everything is working properly. Um, they would have we would have conducted focus after that. Focus is where I, as a designer, I stand on stage and I stare at the lights, blinding myself, and I tell my electrics crew where to point the light. Um, when we are talking about lighting design and implementing a design and planning for a design, um, we're all about lighting the face. So what I'm doing as I'm standing there getting blinded by the light is I'm looking for certain areas in that light. I'm looking for what's called the hot spot, and I'm looking for that to be right on my face. So that way, when actors actually start acting and they do their thing, I know that when they walk on stage, they will be well lit and their face will be well lit. Um, so that's a little bit about focus. Um, After focus, we make sure everything's installed and all set. Any practicals, that would be used in the show would be on stage, of course, installed. Practicals are anything on stage that would have practical use, or pretty much anything that's not an actual fixture. Um, when I did carousel out at the high school, we had a few practicals. We had a set of string lights that were on our carousel canopy, and then we had string lights that hung above the audience. So those were practicals. For the Grapes of Wrath, we had a bunch of practicals. We had truck headlights. We had to light the interior of a truck cab. We had two campfires that we had to do. We also had string lights that came down. So we had a bunch of practicals that needed to be installed. And we needed to make sure those were working. And that brings me into the next section that would happen, which would be queuing. It's very important for all those practicals and for all of your working parts to be working by queuing, because you need to have everything that is going to light up. You need to have it working because you need to know how it's going to look in those full stage lighting looks. You need to know if it's going to affect anything. So queuing is a fun process. I always had a lot of fun queuing all of my shows. Um, what typically happens is I sit down someplace next to the board with my cue sheet and any notes and a notebook so I can take notes as we go through. Um, we typically have a person on the board, whether it's the assigned programmer for the show or if it's the master electrician or the head electrician. Um, they sit at the board and they punch buttons and they program the show, they program the cues. Um, Typically, best practice for queuing is to just get the cues in the board. Just write the cues. They don't have to be perfect. It's just very important to get something in the board because of time constraints. Um, you know, it's something that's kind of bitten me before. Um, Honestly, in academia, I was a lot better at it because again, I had time constraints. Um, the idea, of course, is to just get something in the board and then you have it for tech rehearsals, and then you can fix it later on as you go through those tech rehearsals. Again, because of time constraints in academia, I was a lot better at it because I knew I had to push through and get these done because I only had this chunk of time to get it done. Honestly, the one or two shows I've done, um, outside of academia, I have not often, but I have spent a bit too much time writing cues. And then I obsess over things as we go through, and it's just not a very good process. Oftentimes I tell my assistant, who's been working with me for a long time now, I tell my assistant if he's working with me that day as we're queuing, I will tell him, if I start taking too long on certain cues, you tell me to stop and get moving, tell me to move forward, to move on. Because, it's very, again, it's better to get all of your cues just in the board and then be able to edit them as you go through the show and edit them through all day tech or what have you. Um, so after queuing, um, typically what happens is, by this point, uh, after focus, I did forget about something, excuse me. Um, so in between focus and queuing, we go to the design team goes to what's called designer run. And what that is it is a full run through of the show with full blocking. And from that designer run, I make my cue list. Um, that's lighting side, of course. I make my cue list with where the actors are moving, where they are, where they're positioned, what line they move on, just in case I have certain cues that are dependent on that. Um, And during designer run, uh, I often film it, just so I can have it for personal record, so I can make my cue list later. In past shows, what we have done when I was an assistant, even an associate lighting designer, is we have actually made the cue list as we go, and we tape it, just so that way, we start doing this. We start working on it during the run, and then we go back and re-review it later. Um, Again, I've done it both ways. I don't have a preference either way, but I tend to watch the rehearsal and then think about what I'm gonna do. I take notes as needed, and then I make my cue list later. After once I'm watching it back. It is very important when you're making a cue list to be as specific as possible. It's very important also when you're taking notes to be as specific as possible, because I have uh, taken notes many a time, and I just write down the first thing that pops into my head about what has to be done, and it ends up being a very simple note that just says, uh, you know, Q55 needs work, and that doesn't help me. And I know it doesn't help me, but I'm so much in the moment and I get in my head so much that I don't think about what specifically has to be done, because I'm too focused on getting the other cues in, getting the other stuff fixed. Um, it has hurt me in the past, because I lose time trying to figure out exactly what Q55 needed work on. I always tell myself in the moment that's going to be enough, but it never is. Um, so it's very important to be very, very specific. So, like, if Q55 needs work, what is it? Does it need a new backlight color? Does it need to be reworked completely? What is it? If you are an assistant, and you have this kind of rapport with your designer, um, you know, and they just say something like that, a note like that, ask them to be more specific, because it's going to help them later. It would help me later. I know personally with my assistant, again, we've been working for a while. We have that kind of rapport. If I have told him, if I ever give a very generic note like Q55 needs work, he needs to stop me and tell me to be more specific. The same thing was happening during the Grapes of Wrath. I told my master electrician, who was taking notes during rehearsals at the time, if I ever give you a vague note, tell me to be more specific, because if I don't, I'm going to screw myself later. Um, so again, with cue lists, you want to be as specific as possible. I realized I was getting kind of off the rails there. That tends to happen a lot. I go off on different tangents. Um, so um, once our cue list is made, um, we sit down with the director and the stage manager, either before or after queuing, depending on what you're going to be doing. Um, what we sit down for is, again, dependent on your theater company. Um, in academia, we did paper tech. In other theaters, we've done dry tech. It all depends on what's going on. It all depends on your design team. Um, Paper tech is where you sit down with your stage manager and your director. Oftentimes, we had our sound designer with us too during paper tech, and we just go through a script page by page, and we say, okay, I have a cue here, and this is what's going to happen. We do this for two reasons. One is so the stage manager can get the cues in their book, so they can figure out standbys and everything else for the start of the run. And it's also for the director to get an idea of what these cues are going to be, where the cues are, and they can say, hey, I don't really like the idea of that cue there, or what about having a cue here for this reason. Um, it's a very helpful process, so that way you can add things in before all day tech or that first tech rehearsal. Um, Dry tech is a very similar process. You sit down with the stage manager and the director, but you're in the space and you're actually looking at the cues on stage. So the director can, add a little bit of feedback in if they feel it's necessary. Um, Preferably, obviously, before a dry tech, your cue list would be given to your stage manager so they can look at the cue list and put the cues in themselves, and they can ask any questions about how it's supposed to be called or anything else. Um, so check my list, see if there's anything else I wanted to add in. That's it. That's it for this video, I should say. For what would happen after this is we would have, depending on when paper tech or dry tech was, there might be a little bit of time before all day tech. And that's where I'll pick up in the next video, as I'll be talking about the tech process, and we'll be starting with all day tech itself. Another thing that I didn't mention, but it is very important to this process, is console setup. It's it's part of the process that I don't know if anybody really knows about. It's a very simple process, but it can be very important. So, just a quick rundown of what exactly it is. Usually on the first day of hang, or even the second day of hang, or just as soon as possible before focus, the master electrician or the head electrician will grab a few electricians and they will set up our tech table. Um, Again, this is based off of academia. This is what I've done in the past. In other facilities I've worked in, other theater companies, it's a little bit different. For when I'm working at, when I'm a freelancer, I have to do this myself, but it's still very important. We set up our tech table and we set it up in a position where we can see what's going on stage with our lights. Typically we set up about halfway through the house, halfway through the audience. That way we have a good vantage point of the actors' faces. We can see if our backlighting is working. We can make sure we're not blinding the audience at all. Sometimes you want to blind the audience, every now and then you do. But you need to be sure you're not blinding the audience at the wrong times. So you need to be sure, and you're sitting about halfway through, maybe a little bit less somewhere. You got to find that sweet spot so you can see everything. You don't want to be queuing from the booth, because sometimes the booth is way up here and you can't tell what you're doing. You can't see anything. So you need to be down farther so you can actually see what's going on, because oftentimes, again, the booth is going to be a little bit elevated, and it's elevated so that everybody in there can see better, of course, but it's not conducive for queuing. So you want to be sure you're in the house somewhere and you can actually see exactly what you're doing. From there, we set up our console, we set up our lighting board so we can make sure everything is working properly from in the house. And it's at that point, it's up to the programmer or whomever is going to be on the board to set up the console. And for me, when I'm freelancing and I'm designing by myself and I am acting as a programmer, I like to set things up in a certain way. And I know that certain programmers have their preferences too. When you're a programmer, when you're a designer acting as your own programmer, it's very important to be as fast as possible when you're looking for certain things. So I like to set my console up in a certain way, my screens up in a certain way that I can see everything as much as possible and make sure I have as much information as possible on those screens. So I do hope you have enjoyed this video. I again hope you have enjoyed this process so far. As I said, it's been a lot of fun. I do miss being in the theater quite a bit and actually being able to work on shows like this. This would have been a great deal of fun to be able to work on for real. But you know, soon enough we'll get back to a new normal, and we'll be able to work on shows again. As I've been seeing around with a lot of theater companies posting, it's only intermission. So, Act Two will soon begin again. So, again, for I think a third time now, I do hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you have enjoyed this process so far. I hope you are learning a little bit more about, the tech theater field and even the lighting design field, of course. That's why I wanted to make these videos, is to show you guys my side of things, and hopefully you have been learning a few things and enjoying these videos. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time for one of my last videos on people, places, and things, which is the tech process. Thanks. Bye.